Marcus Thompson collapsed to his knees on the cold hospital linoleum, his calloused hands trembling as they gripped the platinum credit card. The monitor's flatline screech from room 314 pierced through his skull like a death knell. It wasn't supposed to end this way. 7-year-old Grace had been laughing just 3 hours ago, asking when her princess mommy would visit again. The mysterious woman in the torn wedding dress pressed the card deeper into his palm, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Use it," she whispered, mascara streaking down porcelain cheeks. "Please." Mrs. Rodriguez, the night nurse, stumbled backward from Grace's room, her face drained of color. 23 years of pediatric care, and she'd never seen a child fight this hard to live. The crash cart's wheels squeaked frantically down the hallway. "We need that surgery authorization now, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Williams shouted over the chaos. But the man who'd sacrificed Harvard and his inheritance for this little girl had exactly $43 to his name. Who was this angel in wedding white? And why did Grace's survival suddenly depend on a stranger's generosity? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson had been a different man entirely. The faded Harvard engineering diploma hanging crooked behind his cluttered desk told only half the story. At 32, he should have been designing bridges or skyscrapers, not lying beneath rusted pickup trucks in a garage that smelled perpetually of motor oil and broken dreams. The transformation began with a phone call that shattered his world. "Your brother, Jake, is dead," the social worker had said with clinical detachment. "Car accident. There's a child." Grace had been 4 then. A tiny girl with Jake's stubborn chin and their mother's green eyes, standing in a sterile office clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. Marcus remembered the moment he'd made his choice. Grace had looked up at him with those impossibly large eyes and whispered, "Are you going to leave me too?" The acceptance letter from MIT's graduate program had been sitting on his kitchen counter. He'd torn it up that same afternoon. His parents had been furious. "You're throwing your life away for that child," his father had thundered from the marble foyer of their Beacon Hill mansion. "She's not even your responsibility." The trust fund had been revoked within a week. The monthly allowance that had funded his undergraduate years, gone. His name crossed off the family Christmas cards like he'd never existed. But Grace had been worth every sacrifice. Every sleepless night when her asthma attack sent them racing to emergency rooms. Every time he'd chosen between fixing the garage's broken air conditioning or buying her inhaler refills. Every moment when other fathers complained about their children while he thanked God for his unexpected daughter. The garage itself was a testament to stubborn pride. Thompson's auto repair sat wedged between a laundromat and a bodega in East Austin, where gentrification hadn't quite reached. His customers were working families who needed their 15-year-old Hondas to last another 50,000 miles, who paid in cash and brought him homemade tamales at Christmas. They trusted him because he understood their struggles. Mrs. Henderson lived next door, a 78-year-old widow whose late husband had been Marcus's first customer. She'd appointed herself Grace's surrogate grandmother, teaching her to knit and sharing stories about the old days when the neighborhood was filled with young families instead of empty lots waiting for developers. Grace had adapted to their simple life with the resilience that only children possess. She did homework at the garage's front desk, greeted customers with gap-toothed smiles, and never complained about their thrift store clothes or generic cereal. But Marcus saw how she watched other children with their mothers, how she drew pictures of imaginary families where she had someone to braid her hair and attend school plays. The medical bills had been mounting for months. Grace's asthma was worsening, requiring expensive treatments that insurance barely covered. Marcus worked 16-hour days, taking on any job that came through the door, but it was never enough. The foreclosure notice hidden in his desk drawer gave him 30 days to catch up on payments. He'd been contemplating the unthinkable when the strange woman in the wedding dress appeared at his door. The night of September 15th started like any other. Marcus had been hunched over the engine of Mrs. Garcia's ancient Buick, trying to coax another year of life from a transmission that should have been retired during the Clinton administration. Grace sat at the front desk, coloring in a princess book while humming off-key melodies that made his heart ache with pure love. "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like the other kids?" she asked suddenly, her crayon frozen mid-stroke over Cinderella's golden hair. Marcus wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, buying time. They'd had this conversation before, but it never got easier. "You do have a mommy, sweetheart. She's just in heaven, watching over us." Grace looked up with those impossibly wise green eyes. "But I don't remember her. Was she pretty like the princesses in my book?" Before Marcus could answer, the sound of running footsteps echoed from the street outside. Someone was crying, not the frustrated tears of a broken-down motorist, but the desperate sobs of someone whose world had just collapsed. The garage's overhead door rattled as someone pounded against it. "Please, please, is anyone there?" Marcus glanced at Grace, who had gone completely still. He approached the door cautiously. East Austin, after 10 p.m., wasn't exactly the safest place for a single father and his daughter. But something in that voice, raw with panic and pain, made him override his caution. He pressed the button, and the door groaned upward to reveal a sight that would haunt him for months afterward. A young woman stood in the yellow pool of the streetlight, her elaborate white gown torn and stained with mud. What had once been an intricate updo now hung in wet tangles around her face, and her makeup ran in dark streams down her cheeks. She clutched a small beaded purse to her chest, like a lifeline. "I'm sorry," she gasped, backing away as if suddenly realizing how she must look. "I shouldn't have. I was just—" "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding everything else. "Do you need me to call the police?" "No!" The word came out sharp with terror. "No police! Please! I need somewhere safe. Just for tonight. I can pay." Grace had crept up behind Marcus, peering around his legs with unconcealed fascination. "Daddy, is she a real princess?" The woman's tear-filled eyes found Grace, and something shifted in her expression. The panic softened into wonder. "Oh," she whispered. "Hello there, little one." "You look just like the princesses in my coloring book," Grace announced with 7-year-old directness. "Except you're crying. Why are princesses sad?" Marcus watched the stranger's face crumble at his daughter's innocent question. Whatever had happened to her tonight had been devastating, and despite every logical warning screaming in his head about bringing strangers home, he found himself saying, "Come on inside. Let's get you cleaned up." The woman stepped into the garage's fluorescent brightness, and Marcus got his first clear look at her. She was probably mid-20s, with the kind of refined features that spoke of good breeding and expensive dentistry. The wedding dress, despite its current condition, was clearly custom-made. He could see hand-sewn pearls and intricate lacework that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "What's your name?" Grace asked, taking the woman's hand with the fearless trust of childhood. "Sophia," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia Carter." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Carter. As in Carter Industries, the real estate empire that had been gentrifying Austin for the past decade. As in Richard Carter, the billionaire whose face graced the business section of every newspaper in Texas. This wasn't just some runaway bride. This was probably the most valuable missing person in the state. "Grace, honey, go get the first aid kit from the office," he said carefully, never taking his eyes off Sophia. "And maybe some of those wet wipes." As soon as Grace skipped away, Marcus lowered his voice. "Lady, I don't know what kind of trouble you're running from, but if you're who I think you are, There are going to be people looking for you. Important people. Rich people. The kind who don't take kindly to guys like me being anywhere near their daughters. Sophia looked up at him with eyes that held more pain than any 26-year-old should carry. You're right. I should go. I shouldn't have come here. Shouldn't have involved you or your daughter. But as she turned toward the door, Grace came running back with the first aid kit, her face bright with excitement. I found bandages. And Daddy, can the princess stay for dinner? We have spaghetti, and I can show her my room. Sophia stopped walking. For a long moment she just stared at Grace's hopeful face. Please, she whispered to Marcus, just tonight. I promise I'll be gone by morning. The week that followed changed everything Marcus thought he knew about class, dignity, and the true meaning of wealth. Sophia had kept her word about leaving by morning, but Grace's tears and a sudden thunderstorm had convinced Marcus to let her stay just one more day. That day stretched into a week as autumn settled over Austin like a comfortable blanket. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The polished princess who had stumbled into his garage gradually shed her designer shell, revealing someone Marcus had never expected to find beneath the privilege. By day 3, Sophia was wearing one of his old work shirts, her manicured nails chipped from helping with oil changes and brake repairs. You don't have to do this, Marcus told her on Wednesday morning as she struggled to properly grip a wrench. This isn't your world. Sophia looked up from beneath the hood of a Honda Civic, a streak of grease across her cheek. Maybe that's exactly why I need to do it. I've spent 26 years in a world where everything is done for me. I don't even know if I'm capable of anything real. Grace had appointed herself Sophia's teacher in all things important: how to make scrambled eggs without burning them, the proper way to braid hair, and which cartoon characters were worth watching. In return, Sophia read bedtime stories with the kind of theatrical flair that made Grace giggle until her sides hurt. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the most. Marcus would catch Sophia staring at Grace with an expression of such longing it made his chest tight. When Grace had an asthma attack on Thursday night, Sophia had stayed up all night, counting the child's breaths and holding her small hand. She's not your responsibility, Marcus had said gently as dawn broke through the windows. Neither was I yours, Sophia replied. But you took me in anyway. The first real test came when Grace's inhaler ran empty on Friday. Marcus stared at the pharmacy receipt in his truck, calculating and recalculating. $247 for a medication his daughter needed to breathe. He had $63 in his checking account and a credit card that had been maxed out for months. When he returned home empty-handed, preparing to explain to Grace why she'd have to be extra careful until his next paycheck, he found Sophia waiting with a paper bag from the pharmacy. You went back, he said, not quite making it a question. She needs to breathe, Marcus. I can't pay you back. Not anytime soon. Sophia's eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger. Do you think I did this to create debt? To hold something over you? I think you're used to solving problems with money, and I'm used to solving them without it. Those are two very different worlds. Then teach me about yours, she said quietly. Because mine never taught me what it feels like to have someone trust you with what matters most to them. That night, Grace asked the question that had been building all week. Is Sophia going to be my new mommy? Marcus found himself choking on his response. The idea had occurred to him, how could it not? But hearing it spoken aloud by his 7-year-old daughter made it both more real and more impossible. Sweetheart, Sophia has her own life, her own family. This is just temporary. Grace's face fell. But she makes pancakes shaped like butterflies, and she doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. And she looks at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in my movie. Grace? And you look at her the same way. Grace added with devastating 7-year-old honesty. Marcus tucked his daughter into bed that night with a heart full of confusion. When he emerged from her room, he found Sophia sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold. "She's right, you know," Sophia said without looking up, "about how we look at each other." Marcus sat down across from her, suddenly aware of how small his kitchen was, how the linoleum was cracked near the refrigerator, how different their worlds truly were. "Sophia, whatever this is between us—" "It's real," she interrupted. "Don't you dare say it isn't real." "Real doesn't mean possible." "Why not?" "Because you're Sophia Carter, and I'm a guy who counts quarters to buy his kids' medicine. Because your father could buy and sell my entire life without blinking. Because when this week is over, you'll go back to your world, and I'll still be here in mine." Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. Her palm was soft despite the week's work, but her grip was steady. "What if I don't want to go back?" "Everyone says that until reality sets in. You don't know me well enough to decide what I can handle. I know you well enough to know you deserve better than struggling to pay rent and lying awake at night wondering if you can afford to take your kid to the doctor." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father has been planning my life since I was Grace's age. Who I'd marry, where I'd live, how many children I'd have, what charities I'd support. I've never made a single decision that was truly mine." She looked up at him then, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "Except this week. Except choosing to stay, choosing to learn, choosing to love your daughter, choosing to—" She faltered. "Choosing to what?" "Choosing to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Marcus was terrified to cross. Because once he stepped onto it, there would be no going back to the careful distance he'd been trying to maintain. "Sophia, The doorbell rang, cutting through the moment like a blade. Marcus glanced at the clock. 10:30 p.m. Nobody made social calls at 10:30 in East Austin. Through the front window he could see black SUVs lining the street. They'd been found. The doorbell's second chime echoed through the small house like a death knell. Marcus moved toward the window, but Sophia caught his arm, her face pale with recognition. "It's him," she whispered. "My father." Through the thin curtains, Marcus could see the silhouettes of men in expensive suits flanking the front door. The lead figure was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that seemed to bend reality around itself. Richard Carter didn't need to announce himself. His very stance screamed wealth and authority. "Grace," Marcus said urgently, "go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear." For once, his daughter didn't argue. She'd heard that tone before, the same one he'd used during the break-in attempt 2 years ago. Grace disappeared down the hallway, and Marcus heard her bedroom door click shut. The doorbell rang a third time, followed by a firm knock that rattled the cheap wood frame. "Miss Carter," came a voice from outside, smooth as aged whiskey but cold as winter steel. "I know you're in there. Please don't make this more difficult than necessary." Sophia stood frozen in the middle of the living room, torn between fight and flight. Marcus made the decision for both of them, straightening his shoulders and walking to the door. "Mr. Thompson," Richard Carter said the moment the door opened, as if they were old acquaintances meeting for lunch. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I have someone who chose to be here," Marcus replied evenly. "That's not the same thing." Richard's smile was razor-thin. Behind him, 3 men in dark suits waited with the patience of predators. "May I come in?" "I think we need to have a conversation." Marcus wanted to say no, to slam the door and pretend this moment would never come. But he could see more SUVs at the end of the block, and he had Grace to think about. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. Richard Carter entered Marcus's home like a conquering general surveying captured territory. His gaze swept over the second-hand furniture, the patched couch, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. Everything about his expression said he found it exactly as distasteful as expected. "Sophia," he said without turning around. "Come here." She emerged from the kitchen, and Marcus was struck by how small she suddenly seemed. The confident woman who'd been learning to change oil and braid hair had vanished, replaced by a frightened girl trying to disappear into herself. "Hello, Father. Do you have any idea what you've put me through this week? The humiliation. Jonathan's family has been asking questions I can't answer. The wedding planner has been calling every hour. And you?" He gestured around the room with undisguised contempt. "You've been playing house with a mechanic." "His name is Marcus," Sophia said quietly. "I don't care what his name is." Richard's voice never rose, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Get your things. We're leaving." "No." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, his daughter had never refused him so directly before. "Excuse me?" "I said no, Father. I'm not leaving." Richard turned to Marcus with the kind of look that had probably toppled business empires. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to give you one chance to do the right thing here. My daughter is clearly experiencing some sort of breakdown. She's not thinking clearly. You seem like a decent man. Surely you can see that this situation is untenable." Marcus felt the weight of those words. Decent man. The implication was clear. A decent man wouldn't take advantage of a confused heiress, wouldn't drag her down to his level, wouldn't pretend that love could bridge the canyon between their worlds. "What I see," Marcus said carefully, "is a grown woman making her own choices." "Choices?" Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Thompson, let me explain something about choices. My daughter has never made a real choice in her life. She's had everything handed to her, every obstacle removed, every path smoothed. She has no more idea how to navigate the real world than a hothouse orchid knows how to survive a Texas drought." "You might be surprised," Marcus began. "Might I?" Richard pulled out his phone and showed Marcus the screen. It was a bank statement. "Do you know what this is? It's Sophia's spending for last month. $37,000. On what, you ask? Shoes she wore once? A purse that matches a dress she forgot she owned. A charity gala ticket that she bought and never attended because she was having her nails done." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She spent more on lunch last Tuesday than you probably make in a week," Richard continued relentlessly. "That's not a criticism of you, Mr. Thompson. That's just reality. And reality is what you're going to have to deal with if you continue this fantasy." "It's not a fantasy," Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Richard turned to his daughter with the surgical precision of someone who knew exactly where to cut deepest. "Have you told him about the time you spent $40,000 on art supplies because you thought you wanted to be a painter? Or when you decided to save the rainforest and lasted exactly 6 weeks before you got bored? Or what about the yoga instructor phase, the organic farming obsession, the month you spent learning French because you thought you might move to Paris?" Each word hit like a physical blow. Marcus watched Sophia's face crumble as her father systematically destroyed the foundation of everything they'd built together. "This is just another phase, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice gentling into something that might have been mistaken for affection if it hadn't been so calculated. "You're rebelling against the wedding, against Jonathan, against the life I've planned for you. I understand, but don't drag this good man and his daughter into your rebellion." "Father, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Richard walked to the window and gestured toward the neighborhood beyond. "Look around, Sophia. Really look. This is poverty, real, grinding, day-to-day poverty. Mr. Thompson works 16-hour days just to keep the lights on. His daughter needs medical care he can barely afford. These aren't romantic struggles. They're the kind of problems that destroy people. Marcus found his voice. We manage just fine. Do you? Richard turned back to him. Your garage is 3 months behind on the lease. Your daughter's medical bills are piling up, your credit cards are maxed out, and you're one emergency away from losing everything. Those aren't accusations, Mr. Thompson. I had you investigated. They're facts. The room fell silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Marcus felt exposed, stripped bare by the casual brutality of Richard's research. Now, Richard continued, let me tell you what I'm prepared to offer. $2 million, cash, in exchange for you walking away from my daughter and never contacting her again. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $2 million. Grace's medical bills paid for life. The garage mortgage cleared, college funds, security, everything he'd dreamed of being able to give his daughter. You can't buy people, Sophia whispered. I'm not buying anyone, Richard replied. I'm offering Mr. Thompson the chance to give his daughter the life she deserves. What father wouldn't take that deal? Marcus looked at Sophia, at the woman who'd learned to change oil with dirt under her fingernails, who'd stayed up all night monitoring Grace's breathing, who'd made butterfly pancakes and braided hair and read bedtime stories with theatrical flair. Then he looked at Richard Carter, at $2 million in cash, at the chance to give Grace everything he'd never been able to provide. There's one problem with your offer, Mr. Carter, Marcus said finally, which is, you're assuming that what my daughter deserves is money, but what she really deserves is to grow up knowing that some things in this world can't be bought, that love isn't a transaction, that her father chose her over everything else, even when everything else would have been easier. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake, Mr. Thompson. A very expensive mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. And what about Sophia's mistake? Because that's what this is, a mistake that will cost her everything she's ever known, everyone she's ever trusted, every advantage she's ever had. Are you prepared to watch her struggle? To see her fail when the real world proves too much for her? To be there when the novelty wears off and she realizes what she's given up? The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus looked at Sophia and saw the doubt creeping into her eyes, the fear that her father might be right. That's when Grace's bedroom door opened. "Daddy?" came a small voice from the hallway. "Is everything okay?" Marcus turned to see his daughter standing there in her princess pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep, her inhaler clutched in her small hand. She'd been listening. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go back to bed." But Grace didn't move. Instead, she walked directly to Sophia and took her hand. "Are you leaving?" Grace asked simply. Sophia knelt down to Grace's level, and Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "I don't know, sweetie, but you said you loved us," Grace said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "And we love you. Doesn't that matter?" Richard Carter, destroyer of business empires and shaper of destinies, stared down at a 7-year-old girl and, for the first time since entering the house, seemed at a loss for words. "Sometimes love isn't enough, little one," he said finally, his voice softer than before. Grace looked up at him with those impossibly wise green eyes. "My daddy says that's what people tell themselves when they're too scared to try." Grace's innocent words shattered the tension like a hammer through glass. Richard Carter stared down at the small girl, his carefully constructed argument suddenly seeming hollow against the simple wisdom of a child who understood that love meant fighting for what mattered. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Richard's phone rang. "Excuse me," he said, stepping toward the window. His voice was clipped, professional. "Carter, what do you mean the Singapore deal fell through? I don't care what time it is there. Get Morrison on the phone." "No, I can't discuss this right now." He ended the call with visible frustration, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something unexpected in the billionaire's eyes. Exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd spent 20 years building walls around his heart. "Sophia," Richard said, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "We need to go. There are matters that require immediate attention, and your engagement party is tomorrow night. Jonathan's family expects—" "I'm not marrying Jonathan." The words came out flat, final. Sophia stood up from Grace's level, and Marcus watched her transform before his eyes. The scared girl who'd been shrinking under her father's disapproval was gone, replaced by a woman who'd found her backbone. "Don't be ridiculous," Richard snapped. "The Whitmore family has been planning this union for 2 years. The contracts are signed, the prenuptials—" "I don't care about the contracts. I don't love him, Father. I never have, and I never will." "Love?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "Sophia, your mother loved me, and look how that ended. Love is a luxury people like us can't afford. Marriage is a business arrangement, a strategic alliance. The Whitmore shipping empire combined with our real estate holdings will make us the most powerful family in Texas." "Then you marry Jonathan?" Sophia shot back. "Leave me out of your empire building." Richard's face darkened. "Everything I've done has been for you. Every sacrifice, every difficult decision, every sacrifice you've made has been to control me." Sophia's voice rose for the first time since her father had arrived. "You've planned every detail of my life since I was Grace's age. My schools, my friends, my career, my husband. When do I get to choose anything for myself?" "You can choose when you've proven you can make rational decisions. This," he gestured around Marcus's modest living room, "is not rational." Marcus had been listening to the exchange with growing discomfort. This wasn't his fight, and he was beginning to feel like an intruder in a family drama that had roots going back decades. But when Sophia looked at him with desperate eyes, seeking support, he found himself speaking. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something?" Richard turned to him with barely concealed impatience. "Make it quick, Mr. Thompson. When you fell in love with Sophia's mother, did anyone try to talk you out of it?" For a moment, Richard's carefully controlled mask slipped. Marcus saw pain there, raw and unhealed after all these years. "That's different," Richard said quietly. "How?" "Because I was nobody then, a kid from the wrong side of Dallas with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work 18-hour days. Sarah's family tried to stop our marriage because they thought I wasn't good enough for her. They were probably right. But you married her anyway." "Yes." "Because you loved her." Richard's jaw tightened. "Because I was young and stupid and thought love conquered everything." "And did it?" Marcus pressed. "For a while." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard walked to the window and stared out at the street, his shoulders rigid with tension. "For 18 years, he said finally. "For 18 perfect, impossible years it did. Then why are you so determined to deny your daughter the same chance?" "Because love killed her." The words exploded out of Richard with 20 years of suppressed anguish. "Because she chose her music over her health, chose her dreams over reality, and it killed her. She was already sick when she started performing again, but she hid it from me. She wanted to leave something beautiful behind, something that mattered. But what mattered to me was her, and she threw that away for an applause that couldn't save her life." Grace, who had been standing silently through this exchange, suddenly walked over to Richard and took his hand. He looked down at her in surprise, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "My daddy says that when people we love die, it's not because they didn't love us enough," Grace said solemnly. It's because sometimes loving someone means letting them be who they need to be, even if it scares us. Richard stared at the little girl, and Marcus saw something crack in his carefully constructed armor. "Your daddy is very wise," Richard said hoarsely. "He is," Grace agreed. "And he says that being scared is okay. But being mean because you're scared isn't okay." The simple truth of it hung in the air. Richard Carter, master of corporate boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, had been brought to his knees by a 7-year-old's honesty. Sophia crossed the room and put her hand on her father's arm. "Daddy, I know you miss her. I miss her too, every single day. But I can't live in the shadow of your fear forever. You don't understand the risks. I understand them better than you think. I've been living with them my entire adult life. The risk of loving someone who might leave, the risk of choosing wrong, the risk of being hurt." She glanced at Marcus and Grace. "But I've also learned something these past few weeks. The risk of not loving at all is so much worse." Richard was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The Whitmore contract can be broken," Sophia said firmly. "You taught me that everything has a price. Pay it. The scandal will blow over. You taught me that too. And if you're wrong about this, about him," Richard's eyes found Marcus, "what if this is just another phase, another rebellion that ends in heartbreak?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Then I'll have my heart broken by someone who made me feel alive, instead of someone who made me feel dead inside. That's still a better choice." Richard looked around the small house one more time, taking in the worn furniture, the stack of bills, the clear evidence of struggle and sacrifice. But Marcus saw something different in his expression now. Not contempt, but a grudging recognition of something he'd lost along the way. "Mr. Thompson," Richard said finally, "you're asking my daughter to give up everything she's ever known, her inheritance, her social position, her security. Are you prepared to provide for her? To protect her from the realities of a life where money is always tight and the future is never guaranteed?" Marcus felt the weight of the question. $2 million still sat on the table between them, metaphorically speaking. He could take the money, ensure Grace's future, and let Sophia return to her gilded cage. It would be the practical choice, the sensible choice. Instead, he said, "I can't promise her security, Mr. Carter. I can't promise her that we'll never struggle or that things will always work out. What I can promise is that she'll never doubt whether someone loves her for who she is instead of what she represents. And maybe that's worth more than all the security money can buy." Richard studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the razor-sharp expression he'd worn earlier, but something genuine and almost sad. "You know what the strangest part is?" Richard said. 25 years ago, I gave Sarah's father almost the exact same speech. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Richard Carter, the man who'd built an empire on calculated decisions and ruthless pragmatism, had once been young and in love and willing to risk everything for a woman whose family thought he wasn't good enough. But the moment of vulnerability passed quickly. Richard straightened his shoulders, his mask sliding back into place. "The difference, Mr. Thompson, is that I proved Sarah's father wrong. I built something. I created security for my family. And lost your wife in the process," Sophia said quietly. The words hit their target. Richard's face went pale, and for a moment he looked every one of his 58 years. "That's enough, Sophia." "Is it? We're finally talking about Mom for the first time in 20 years. And you want to stop now? Your mother made her choice. She chose her music over her family, over her health, over your fear," Sophia interrupted. "She chose to live while she could instead of hiding in a bubble you built around her." Richard's phone rang again. This time he ignored it. It rang again and again, each chime adding to the tension in the small room. Finally he answered. "What is it, Stevens? I told you I'm handling a family matter. No, the merger can wait until tomorrow, because my daughter is more important than a balance sheet." He ended the call and threw the phone onto Marcus's couch with uncharacteristic violence. 20 years, he said, his voice breaking slightly. 20 years I've spent building something that would protect you from ever feeling the kind of pain I felt when she died. And you want to throw it all away for... He gestured helplessly around the room. "For love," Grace said simply. She'd been listening with the intense focus that children bring to adult conversations they're not supposed to understand. "Like in my princess movies." Richard looked down at her, and his expression softened, despite himself. "Life isn't a princess movie, little one." "No," Grace agreed solemnly. "It's better, because in real life people choose to love each other every day, not just once upon a time." Marcus felt his heart clench. His 7-year-old daughter, who'd grown up without a mother and watched him struggle to keep their small family afloat, had somehow developed a wisdom about love that put adults to shame. "Grace," he said gently, "why don't you go back to bed? This is grown-up talk." "But I want to help Sophia stay," Grace protested. "She makes our family better, and families are supposed to stick together." "Not all families work the same way, sweetheart." "But they should," Grace said with the absolute certainty of childhood. She turned to Richard with those impossibly wise green eyes. "Don't you want Sophia to be happy?" "Of course I do," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "Then why are you trying to make her marry someone she doesn't love?" The question, posed with such innocent directness, seemed to pierce through 20 years of Richard's carefully constructed rationalizations. Marcus watched the older man struggle with an answer. "Because," Richard said finally, "sometimes protecting someone means making hard choices they don't understand." "But you're not protecting her," Grace said matter-of-factly. "You're just making her sad. I know about being sad when your family isn't together. It hurts all the time, like having a tummy ache that never goes away." Sophia knelt down beside Grace, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart, you do understand, don't you?" Grace nodded seriously. "When my real daddy died, I was scared nobody would want me. But then Marcus came and said he'd be my daddy forever, even though it was really hard and he had to give up lots of things. And now we're a family, even though we don't have much money." She looked up at Richard with the fearless honesty that only children possess. "Sophia wants to choose her family too, but you're being like the mean king in the stories who locks the princess in the tower." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at Grace as if she'd somehow managed to translate a foreign language he'd been struggling to understand for years. Marcus's phone rang, shattering the moment. He glanced at the caller ID and felt his blood turn to ice. Austin General Hospital. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Hello? Mr. Thompson. This is Dr. Martinez from the emergency department. We have Grace Thompson in our system as having severe asthma. There's been an exposure incident at Sunset Elementary School, some kind of chemical spill in the ventilation system. Several children are being brought in, and we wanted to alert parents whose children might be at higher risk." Marcus's heart stopped. "What kind of chemicals?" "Industrial cleaning solvents. For children with respiratory issues like Grace's, exposure can be extremely dangerous. Is she with you now?" Marcus looked into the living room where Grace stood beside Sophia, her small hand still clasped in the older woman's fingers. "Yes, she's here. She's fine." "Good. Keep her home tomorrow, and if you notice any breathing difficulties, bring her in immediately. We're also recommending that high-risk children be evaluated for preventive treatment. There's a new therapy that can help protect against this kind of exposure, but it's expensive and not covered by most insurance plans." "How expensive?" About $75,000 for the full treatment series. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. $75,000. More money than he'd see in 3 years of working every job he could find. "Mr. Thompson, are you there?" "Yes, yes, I'm here." "What happens if she can't get the treatment?" "We'll monitor her closely and provide standard care if she develops symptoms. But Mr. Thompson, given Grace's medical history, I strongly recommend the preventive therapy. Her lungs are already compromised from previous attacks." Marcus ended the call and stood in his small kitchen, staring at his daughter through the doorway. Grace, who'd survived losing her biological parents, who'd adapted to their modest life with uncomplaining grace, who'd just lectured a billionaire about the nature of love. Grace, who might not survive another severe asthma attack. When he returned to the living room, everyone was looking at him. His face must have given everything away. "What's wrong?" Sophia asked immediately. Marcus tried to find words that wouldn't terrify his daughter. "There was an incident at Grace's school. Chemical exposure. Kids with asthma need to be careful." "How careful?" Richard asked, and Marcus was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "There's a preventive treatment. It's—" Marcus swallowed hard. "It's expensive." "How expensive?" Sophia pressed. Marcus looked at his daughter, at this brave little girl who'd become the center of his universe, and felt something break inside him. $75,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus had maybe $300 in his checking account and credit cards that had been maxed out for months. Even if he sold everything he owned, even if he worked every waking hour for the next 5 years, he'd never be able to afford Grace's treatment. Richard Carter, who controlled billions of dollars, who'd just offered Marcus $2 million to walk away from his daughter, stood in the modest living room and watched a father realize he might not be able to save his child. "The treatment," Richard said quietly. "When does she need it?" "Tomorrow morning. The doctor wants to start it immediately." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Stevens, it's me. I need you to arrange an immediate transfer of funds to Austin General Hospital." "No, not a charitable donation. Medical payment for a patient named Grace Thompson. The amount is irrelevant, because sometimes the numbers that matter most can't be calculated on a balance sheet." He ended the call and looked at Marcus. "Consider it handled." Marcus stared at him, hardly daring to believe what he'd just heard. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to—" "You can pay me back by taking care of my daughter," Richard said simply. "Both of them." Grace looked up at Richard with shining eyes. "Does this mean Sophia can stay?" Richard knelt down to Grace's level, and for the first time since entering the house he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "It means, little one, that sometimes even mean kings can learn to be better." The transformation in Richard Carter was immediate and unsettling. The man who had entered Marcus's home like a conquering general now knelt beside Grace with the uncertain movements of someone rediscovering tenderness. But as the hours passed, it became clear that 20 years of emotional armor couldn't be shed in a single evening. 3 days later, the cracks began to show. Marcus found Sophia sitting on his front steps at dawn, still in her pajamas, staring at her phone with an expression of devastation. The screen showed 17 missed calls from her father and a text message that made Marcus's blood run cold. "The Whitmore contract cannot be broken without destroying everything I've built. Come home, now." "He's changed his mind," Sophia said without looking up. "Jonathan's threatening to pull out of 3 major deals if the engagement is canceled. My father's entire empire could collapse." Marcus sat down beside her on the concrete step, noting how she'd unconsciously pulled away from him. The easy intimacy they'd developed over the past weeks was evaporating like morning mist. "So we fight it," he said. "With what? You saw what happened when he wanted to find me." He has investigators, lawyers, connections I can't even imagine. I've been living in a fairy tale thinking I could just walk away from all of that. Sophia? No, Marcus. Listen to me. She turned to face him, and he saw something that hadn't been there before. Doubt. Not just about their relationship, but about herself. Grace almost died 3 days ago. She needed $75,000 worth of medical care, and you couldn't provide it. I couldn't provide it either. Not without my father's money. What kind of life am I offering her? What kind of mother would I be if I can't even protect the people I love? The words hit Marcus like physical blows. That's not fair. You know that's not fair. Don't I? Marcus, I've been here for 3 weeks playing at being normal, learning to change oil and make pancakes. But the moment real crisis hit, who saved Grace? My father's money. Not your love, not my good intentions. Money. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. Not at Sophia, but at Richard Carter, who had somehow managed to poison his daughter's newfound confidence without even being present. Your father got to you. My father opened my eyes. Do you know what he told me yesterday? That Jonathan's family has threatened to destroy every business partnership Carter Industries has built over the past decade. Thousands of people could lose their jobs because I want to play house with a mechanic. The word mechanic came out like an epithet, and Marcus realized that some part of Sophia had internalized her father's worldview despite everything they'd shared. Is that what you think this is? Playing house? Sophia's silence was answer enough. That afternoon, while Grace was at school, Marcus made the decision that would haunt him for weeks to come. He called Richard Carter. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, neutral territory that somehow felt more like Richard's world than Marcus's. The billionaire arrived precisely on time, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. "Mr. Thompson," Richard said, settling into his chair with the satisfaction of a man who'd already won, "I assume you've reconsidered my offer. I want to talk about Sophia." "What about her?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "She's scared." "Of the responsibility, of the consequences of her choices. You made sure of that." Richard's smile was cold. "I showed her reality. Sometimes reality is frightening. You manipulated her, used her love for Grace against her. I used logic, something you seem incapable of recognizing." Richard leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, let me ask you something. If your daughter needed another surgery, not in 3 months or 3 years, but tomorrow, how would you pay for it?" Marcus said nothing. "What if your garage burned down tomorrow? What if you were injured and couldn't work? What if Grace developed complications from her asthma that required ongoing specialized care?" Richard's voice was relentless, each question a surgical strike against Marcus's deepest fears. "Love is beautiful, Mr. Thompson, but it can't pay medical bills. It can't guarantee security. It can't protect the people you care about from the harsh realities of a world that doesn't care about your feelings. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that my daughter has lived in a world where those fears don't exist, where medical emergencies are inconveniences, not life or death crises, where security is assumed, not fought for every day. You're asking her to give up that safety net for what? The privilege of watching you struggle, the joy of wondering if you can afford rent next month?" Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his love for Sophia, that remained as strong as ever, but his belief that love could be enough, because everything Richard was saying was true, and they both knew it. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked quietly. "I want you to be honest with yourself about what kind of life you're offering her. And then I want you to do the right thing." That evening, Marcus returned home to find Sophia helping Grace with homework at the kitchen table. The domestic scene should have filled him with warmth, but instead it felt like watching something through glass, beautiful but untouchable. "How did your day go?" Sophia asked without looking up from Grace's math worksheet. "Fine," Marcus lied. "Listen, I need to tell you both something." Grace looked up immediately, her 7-year-old instincts detecting the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Marcus sat down across from them, his heart breaking as he prepared to dismantle everything they'd built together. "Sophia, your father came to see me today." Her face went pale. "What did he say?" "He made some points that I can't ignore." Marcus forced himself to meet her eyes. "About security, about what kind of life I can really offer you, about what's best for Grace." "Marcus." "No. Let me finish. I've been selfish. I've been asking you to give up everything you've ever known because I fell in love with you. But love isn't enough if it puts the people we care about at risk." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sending Sophia away?" The question nearly destroyed his resolve. Marcus looked at his daughter, his brave, wise, impossibly mature daughter, and saw his own pain reflected in her face. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people have to make hard choices to protect the people they love." "But we're supposed to be a family," Grace whispered. "We are a family," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "You and me. We've always been enough, haven't we?" Grace stared at him for a long moment, then got up from the table and ran to her room. The slam of her bedroom door echoed through the small house like a gunshot. Sophia sat in stunned silence, her hand still resting on Grace's abandoned homework. "So that's it? You're giving up?" "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." Her voice was quiet but deadly. "You're doing exactly what my father knew you'd do. You're proving that you're not strong enough to fight for us." "Maybe I'm not," Marcus said. "Maybe he's right. Maybe you deserve someone who can give you the life you're used to, someone who doesn't have to count quarters to buy his kids medicine." Sophia stood up slowly, and Marcus saw something die in her eyes. "You know what the saddest part is? I was ready to fight for this. For us. I was ready to give up everything because I thought what we had was worth more than money or security or my father's approval." She walked toward the door, then paused. "But you were never ready to fight for me. You were just waiting for the first excuse to let me go." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Sophia turned back to face him. "The moment things got difficult, the moment my father showed you exactly how hard it would be, you folded. You decided I wasn't worth the struggle. I decided Grace's future was more important than my feelings. No, Marcus, you decided that my father was right about you, that you're not good enough for me, and maybe you're right. But not because of money or social class or any of the things he talked about." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because someone who truly loved me would have fought harder than this." The door closed behind her with terrible finality, leaving Marcus alone in his small kitchen with the sound of his daughter crying through her bedroom wall and the crushing weight of his own choices. Outside, he could hear the engine of Richard Carter's town car starting up, carrying Sophia back to the world she'd tried so desperately to escape. Back to Jonathan Whitmore and a loveless marriage, and a life that would ensure her security at the cost of her soul. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and realized that in trying to protect everyone he loved, he'd lost them both. 6 months passed like a slow hemorrhage of hope. Marcus threw himself into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. 16-hour days became 18, then 20. The garage expanded as he took on jobs he would have refused before. Insurance work, fleet maintenance for local businesses, anything that brought in steady money. Grace's college fund grew slowly but steadily, a monument to responsible parenting built on the ashes of his heart. Grace stopped asking about Sophia after the first month, but Marcus caught her sometimes staring at the empty chair where Sophia used to sit during breakfast. The butterfly pancakes became regular round ones. The bedtime stories returned to his fumbling baritone instead of Sophia's theatrical performances. Their small house felt simultaneously too quiet and too full of memories, Mrs. Henderson tried to help, bringing casseroles and gentle conversation, but even her weathered wisdom couldn't bridge the gulf that had opened in their little family. Grace went through the motions of childhood, school, homework, weekend cartoons, but the light had gone out of her eyes. "She's getting married today," Mrs. Henderson said one Saturday morning in April, setting down a cup of coffee Marcus didn't remember asking for. He didn't need to ask who. The society pages of the Austin American Statesman had been documenting the wedding of the century for weeks. Sophia Carter and Jonathan Whitmore III, uniting two of Texas's most powerful families in a ceremony that would reportedly cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. "Good for her," Marcus said, not looking up from the transmission he was rebuilding. "Is it?" Marcus's hands stilled on the wrench. "She's secure now, set for life. Isn't that what everyone wanted, Mrs.?" Henderson studied him with eyes that had seen 80 years of human folly. Everyone except her. That evening, alone in his garage after Grace had gone to bed, Marcus found himself staring at the local news coverage of the wedding. Sophia looked beautiful in a way that seemed carved from ice, perfect, untouchable, and utterly lifeless. The smile never reached her eyes. When the reporter asked about her happiness, she gave the kind of gracious non-answer that wealthy women learned in finishing school. Jonathan Whitmore stood beside her like a prop, his own smile equally hollow. The whole thing looked less like a wedding and more like a very expensive funeral. Marcus turned off the television and tried to return to his work, but his hands were shaking too badly to hold the tools steady. That's when he heard the car pull up outside. Not the delivery trucks or customer vehicles he was used to. This was something else. Something expensive and quiet that whispered money with every purr of its engine. Marcus glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. The knock on the garage door was soft, almost hesitant. Marcus opened it to find Richard Carter standing in the pale circle of the security light, looking older than his 58 years. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his silver hair mussed, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who just watched his daughter sell her soul for security. "Mr. Thompson," Richard said quietly. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside wordlessly. Richard entered the garage and stood among the tools and car parts like an alien visitor trying to understand a foreign culture. "Beautiful wedding," Marcus said, unable to keep the bitterness entirely out of his voice. "No," Richard replied simply. "It wasn't." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil and hard work. Then Richard spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't say a word during the entire reception. 300 guests, 5-course dinner, 12-piece orchestra, and my daughter sat there like a beautiful statue. She danced when she was supposed to dance, smiled when she was supposed to smile, and said all the right things to all the right people. Sounds perfect. It was perfect. Perfectly horrible." Richard ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Do you know what she said to me when I walked her down the aisle?" Marcus said nothing, but Richard continued anyway. "She said, 'Are you happy now, Daddy? Is this what you wanted?' And you know what I realized in that moment?" "What?" "That I'd become exactly like Sarah's father, the man who tried to keep me away from her because he thought I wasn't good enough, the man I swore I'd never become." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "I spent 20 years building walls to protect her from pain, and instead I trapped her in a prison of my own making." Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. Why are you telling me this? Because 3 hours ago my daughter and her new husband left for their honeymoon in Monaco. And 15 minutes ago I got a call from hotel security in Nice. She never got off the plane. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. What do you mean she never got off the plane? I mean Sophia disappeared somewhere between Austin and France. She gave Jonathan the slip during a layover in New York and vanished. Richard pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a text message. Tell Marcus I'm sorry. For everything. I should have fought harder. Marcus stared at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. Where is she? I don't know. Her credit cards haven't been used, her phone is off, and she could be anywhere in the world by now. Richard met his eyes. But I have a feeling she might come back here, back to the last place she remembers being happy. Richard, no, let me finish. I came here to tell you that I was wrong, about everything, about you, about what my daughter needs, about what love means. Richard's voice grew stronger, more certain. I spent so many years afraid that Sophia would end up like her mother, choosing love over security and paying the ultimate price. But I forgot something important. What? Her mother didn't die because she chose love. She died because she chose to hide her illness from the person who loved her most. If she'd trusted me with the truth, if she'd let me help her fight instead of trying to protect me from her pain. Richard's voice broke completely. We might have had more time. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. I let her go. When things got hard, when you showed me how impossible it would be, I gave up. I chose what was safe over what was right. Then we're both cowards, Richard said quietly. But maybe it's not too late to change that. Before Marcus could ask what he meant, headlights swept across the garage as another car pulled up outside. This one was different, older, smaller, with the irregular rhythm of an engine that had seen better days. The door opened, and Sophia stepped out. She looked nothing like the ice princess from the wedding photos. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater that might have come from a discount store, and her face was blotchy from crying. But her eyes were alive again, bright with something that had been missing for months. Hi, she said simply, looking back and forth between Marcus and her father. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman he'd convinced himself he'd never see again. Richard was the first to find his voice. Sophia, sweetheart, are you? I'm not going back, she said firmly. Not to Jonathan, not to that life, not to any of it. I know what that means. I know I'm giving up my inheritance, my trust fund, everything, but I can't live like that anymore, Daddy. I won't. She turned to Marcus, and he saw the same determination in her eyes that Grace had shown when she'd lectured a billionaire about the nature of love. And you, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You get to decide right now whether you're going to fight for us or whether you're going to let your fear win again. Because I'm done being afraid. I'm done letting other people decide what's best for me. I'm choosing love, Marcus. I'm choosing you and Grace in this life, even if it's hard, even if it's uncertain, even if it scares the hell out of me. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the sheltered heiress he'd convinced himself he couldn't protect, but the brave woman who'd learned to change oil with her bare hands, who'd stayed up all night monitoring a sick child's breathing, who'd walked away from billions of dollars because love mattered more than security. Sophia, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Are you going to fight for us this time? She asked. Marcus crossed the garage in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair and breathing in the scent of her, real and warm and impossibly, wonderfully there. Yes, he whispered. God help me, yes. 1 year later, on a crisp October morning that painted Austin in shades of gold and amber, Marcus Thompson stood in his expanded garage watching his daughter teach his wife how to properly gap a spark plug. The scene should have been ordinary by now, but it still filled him with a wonder that bordered on disbelief. "No, Sophia, you have to feel it click," Grace explained with 8-year-old patience, guiding Sophia's hands with the confident expertise of someone who'd grown up among carburetors and transmissions. "Like Daddy taught me, it's not about forcing it, it's about listening to what the engine needs." Sophia, her once pristine hands now permanently stained with honest work, nodded seriously as she adjusted the gap. Her wedding ring, a simple gold band they'd bought at a pawn shop 6 months ago, caught the morning light as she worked. It was nothing like the 5-carat diamond Jonathan Whitmore had given her, but Marcus had never seen her wear anything more beautiful. The garage itself bore little resemblance to the struggling repair shop Sophia had stumbled into that rainy night. Thompson Carter Automotive now employed 12 people, all of them neighbors who'd needed a second chance or a first opportunity. The expansion had been Richard's idea, an investment in community rather than profit margins, though the business had proved surprisingly successful. "Dad," Grace called out, using the title she'd bestowed on Richard Carter 6 months ago when he'd shown up to her school play with tears in his eyes and a bouquet of grocery store flowers. "Can you help me with this differential?" Richard emerged from beneath a 1987 Chevy pickup, his crisp business suit replaced by coveralls that bore the honest stains of a man learning to work with his hands. At 59, he moved with the careful precision of someone discovering muscles he'd forgotten he possessed, but his eyes held a contentment Marcus had never expected to see. "Come in, sweetheart," Richard called back, and the easy affection in his voice still surprised Marcus. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. There had been arguments, setbacks, moments when the old Richard resurfaced with his need to control and protect. But grief, it turned out, was a powerful teacher. The man who had spent 20 years building walls around his heart was slowly learning to tear them down, brick by painful brick. The bell above the front door chimed, and Mrs. Henderson shuffled in carrying a plate of her famous oatmeal cookies. At 79, she'd appointed herself the garage's unofficial grandmother, bringing food and unsolicited advice in equal measure. "How's our patient doing?" she asked, nodding toward the corner where an old oak rocking chair sat beside a makeshift bed. In the bed, wrapped in quilts and surrounded by get-well cards from customers, lay Walter Martinez, a 62-year-old mechanic who'd had a heart attack the previous month. Marcus had found him collapsed in his own shop, alone and uninsured. Rather than let him rot in a hospital he couldn't afford, they'd moved him into the garage's back office, creating an impromptu recovery room where he could heal surrounded by the sounds and smells of the work he loved. "Ornery as ever?" Sophia said with a grin, settling into the chair beside Walter's bed. Yesterday he tried to diagnose Mrs. Patterson's brake problems from across the room. Walter opened one eye and fixed her with a mock glare. "Those brakes were grinding loud enough to wake the dead." Didn't need to be under the hood to know she needed new pads. It had become their routine, Sophia reading to Walter during his recovery, Grace bringing him her drawings, Richard discussing business strategies that somehow always ended up being lectures about the importance of treating employees like family. Marcus had initially worried about the liability, the complications, the dozen ways their makeshift hospice could go wrong. But watching his unlikely family care for a man who'd had nowhere else to turn, he'd realized they weren't just fixing cars anymore. They were fixing lives, including their own. The real test had come 3 months ago when Jonathan Whitmore's lawyers had finally tracked Sophia down. They'd arrived with papers and threats, demanding the return of wedding gifts and accusing her of fraud. Marcus had watched his wife face down a team of attorneys with the same calm determination she brought to rebuilding transmissions. "I kept nothing that wasn't freely given," she'd told them, and I gave nothing that wasn't freely taken. Find another villain for your story." The legal battle had been swift and decisive. Sophia's prenuptial agreement, it turned out, had been so one-sided that even corporate lawyers couldn't defend it. Her trust fund remained in limbo, but she'd discovered something more valuable than inherited wealth: the satisfaction of earning her own way. Now, watching her explain engine timing to Grace while Richard listened with the intense focus he'd once reserved for billion-dollar deals, Marcus marveled at how love had reshaped them all. Grace had gained not just a mother, but a grandfather who showed up to every school event, sometimes in coveralls that still bore the scent of motor oil. Sophia had found purpose in work that left her exhausted and fulfilled in ways her privileged upbringing had never provided. Richard had discovered that the grandson he'd never expected to have lived in the heart of a little girl who wasn't related to him by blood, but loved him anyway. And Marcus had learned that sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was accept help without letting it diminish his worth. The phone rang, and Sophia answered with the professional cheerfulness she'd developed over months of customer service. "Thompson Carter Automotive. This is Sophia. Yes, we can look at your transmission. Thursday at 10. Perfect." She hung up and made a note in their appointment book. Not the sophisticated computer system Richard had wanted to install, but a simple spiral notebook that Grace had decorated with stickers. Some things they'd all learned didn't need to be improved. "Marcus," Richard said, emerging from beneath the truck with grease-stained hands and a satisfied expression, "I wanted to talk to you about the hospital." 6 months ago, Richard had approached Austin General with a proposal that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of donating money for a new wing or naming rights to a building, he'd offered to fund a sliding-scale automotive repair program for hospital staff and patients' families. The logic was simple. Medical emergencies were expensive enough without adding transportation failures to the burden. "They want to expand the program," Richard continued. 3 more hospitals in the Austin area. But they'd need someone to oversee the operation, coordinate between the hospitals and the repair shops. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a full-time job." "It is. Salary would be comfortable. Not wealthy, but comfortable. You'd be helping people who need it most, using skills you've spent years developing." Richard paused, his expression growing serious. "I know what you're thinking. That this is charity disguised as employment, another way for me to control the situation." "Is it?" "Maybe it started that way," Richard admitted. "But I've learned something this year working beside you. Charity is giving someone what you think they need. Respect is offering someone the chance to earn what they've already proven they deserve." Marcus looked around the garage, at Grace teaching Sophia, at Walter arguing good-naturedly with Mrs. Henderson about cookie recipes, at the photographs on the wall showing birthday parties and baseball games and quiet moments of a family that had chosen each other against all odds and expectations. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "That's all I ask." Richard smiled, and for a moment Marcus glimpsed the young man who'd once fought for the woman he loved against her family's objections. 25 years ago I thought success meant building something so strong that nothing could tear it down. But watching you this year, watching all of you, I've realized something different." "What's that?" "Real success isn't building walls that nothing can penetrate. It's building relationships strong enough to withstand whatever tries to break them." Outside, the October afternoon was fading into evening, and soon they'd close the garage and head home for dinner, all of them together in the house that had once seemed too small for 3 but somehow expanded to welcome whoever needed shelter. Grace ran over and threw her arms around Marcus's waist, her face bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who'd learned that families could be built from love rather than blood, that home was wherever people chose to take care of each other. "Daddy," she said, "are we rich now?" Marcus looked at his daughter, his wife, his father-in-law, and the extended family they'd gathered from the margins of each other's lives. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "We're the richest people in the world.